Welcome back, man. Last time we sketched attraction and dating energy. This episode digs into mate value and why self-esteem changes everything. We also went deep on premium effects, being scarce in the right environment, and how authenticity tends to win on dating apps. Okay, but mate value as a concept, evolutionary psychology, isn't that basically just vibes with jargon? It's vibes with PowerPoint hair, yeah. But the core is actually interesting. Value shifts with context. Context shifts, sure, but are we pretending people don't just get treated differently based on appearance? He didn't deny appearance, he said it's ingredients, looks, status, kindness, behavior, confidence. Ingredients sounds fine, but then it becomes this math where women are either a 9 or a 10. That's the part where people start screaming online, because 9 out of 10 is too blunt for human systems. Yet the provocative idea is, what you bring to the mating marketplace isn't fixed. And then he dropped premium effect, which is basically scarcity but romantic. Exactly. Like being rare in a particular environment, suddenly your baseline value gets a bonus layer. Walk me through the story again because it was hilarious and also kind of depressing. He had a white friend in South London go to some black cultural archives thing, and suddenly she meets incredible people. Not romantic connection, but social oxygen. Friends, conversations, momentum. That's still a win. But doesn't that just mean she found a community with compatible people, not some universal economic law? True, but even compatible communities have filters, like who feels seen and who becomes the scarce commodity. So you're telling me, widen the environment, change the incentives, and your dating outcomes improve. Yes. And the bigger point, low self-esteem makes you need external validation, so you obsess over appearances. I love the gym friend example. He was like, I don't know how she looks on my arm. Bro said it like it's a fashion review channel. That's not love, that's brand management. And the claim was, people who need validation socially tend to stay single longer because they judge the wrong things. Okay, but what if someone is just preferences? Like, I value looks doesn't always equal low self-esteem. Yeah, caring about attractiveness isn't automatically insecure. The insecure part is needing approval to feel safe. Like, if you can admire someone without imagining the crowd's verdict, cool, healthy preference. But if you're negotiating your identity through other people's reactions, then you're basically dating a scoreboard. That ties to self-esteem as a master variable. Higher self-esteem means less conforming to environment pressure. He also said authenticity wins more than people think, especially on Gen Z dating apps. And the argument was, older generations think profiles are supposed to be polished representations, but the unfiltered, imperfect ones do great. So the wrong filter strategy is actually the correct strategy. Nature is healing. He basically said, we're all uniquely experienced, so you're already extraordinary. Stop pretending you're generic. But that's also where people get defensive, because it sounds like, just love yourself, as a blunt instrument. And just love yourself can be toxic if you use it to avoid real work on patterns. Right. Which is why the attachment style example landed, anxious, jealous, needy traits need proactive change. The line was savage. Best time to work on it is before you get into the relationship. Goodbye. That's the therapy on easy mode take. Like, do you want to be repaired while dating or repaired before dating? He said therapy success rates might be low and access is hard, so podcasts and books create awareness first. That part is plausible. You can't fix attachment by vibes alone. You need habits and practice. And he pivoted to active listening, metacognition, watching your thoughts during conflict. Like you catching yourself mid-argument and going, bro, make sure she feels heard. That's not a personality trait, that's a skill, which means you can train it like a muscle. Then he went macro, sex ratio and how environments change dating power. Yeah, that farmland areas in China with a heavy male surplus example, women gain negotiation power because the pool flips. Macro stats are real, but it can get slippery fast. People love to turn it into destiny and blame. Still, the core idea isn't fate, it's leverage. Scarcity on one side increases choice for the other side. And he connected that to university campuses with more women. dating dynamics and behavior change because options change. Which means go where the gender ratio helps sounds cold, but it's basically show up where you have more relevant opportunities. I did push back mentally on the career leverage thing, though. Education pressure versus relationship focus. The other host basically said, Western society tells you, finish career first, but deathbeds were like, I regret relationships. That deathbed framing is intense, because it reframes what important actually means. So, are we optimizing for love early while still building yourself? Or are we saying career is irrelevant? Nobody said career is irrelevant. The debate is sequencing and priorities when you're already busy and distracted. Then comes hypergamy, equal or greater resources, and people freak out because it sounds transactional. And the data argument is always the same. Degree holders select up, then people call women opportunists. But he defended it historically. For survival, selecting for higher resources wasn't some invention. It was necessity. I get the argument, but necessity history doesn't automatically justify modern norms, right? Exactly. People confuse explanation with endorsement. You can say, here's how the incentive works, without saying, therefore it's moral. Still, he tied it to Gen Z. Fewer marriages, maybe stronger ones, fewer kids, more conscious choices. Then the underpopulation replacement rate conversation hit. 1.8 versus 2.1 births, older population costs, nursing home economics. And instantly it becomes political. Natalism versus neonatalism by ethnicity, which is a scary lane. Yeah, because once you frame reproduction as group management, fear turns into extremist policy really fast. The prediction about the UK becoming majority black or brown by 2050 is wild. People react with excitement or terror. That's the problem. Humans treat demographic math like sports standings instead of communities. But the episode's thread stays consistent. Environment, context, self-esteem, and opportunity structures shape outcomes. And the action step is almost annoyingly simple. Raise your inner stability, then choose environments that fit you. Also, keep commitments to yourself. Tiny stuff. Snooze button turns into identity code. I hate how true that is, because trivial is just delayed accountability. All right, next episode, we're going to connect all this to that 70-30 body shape claim and why people react so hard to it. We'll break down whether it's science, marketing, or just an excuse, and what it does to how people date. Welcome back, quickly. We dug into mate value, premium effects, self-esteem, and context. Also, we kept circling the same idea. Environment changes how desirable you feel. When you said premium effect, I immediately thought scarcity plus perception, right? But is it scarcity, or is it just people projecting status onto whatever group is rare? Both can be true, like that J-date experiment. Same person, different pool, instant energy shift. And the funniest part is the crude responses. People turned it into a fetish speedrun. Yeah, like we're arguing about desirability while ignoring how gross some of the attention can be. Still, the underlying mechanism is real. You get different selection pressure in different spaces. Wait, selection pressure is such a cold phrase for dating, but it's accurate. Nature didn't write Tinder UI, but it did write the incentives. Incentives always win. That's why being yourself works, because it routes you to the right mismatch people. But can we separate authenticity wins from algorithm just favors clearer signals? Oh, it's both. A real photo, no filter, and a weird, honest line. Suddenly you're legible. And legible to whom? Like the same traits could repel someone else, obviously. True, but mate value isn't universal. It's contextual. Short-term and long-term dating behave differently. Short-term leans hard on physical cues and novelty. Long-term adds trust, kindness, behavior, and future fit. So mate value is basically ingredients on the plate, not the plate itself. But then how do we stop people from weaponizing this? Like turning it into a scorecard. Mate value is just astrology for insecure people if you don't ground it in behavior change. Exactly. Self-esteem is the switch. Higher self-esteem means you need less external validation to feel okay. Yet people still chase validation even when they feel confident. So is self-esteem really the driver? I think it's probabilistic. Low self-esteem increases appearance focus because you're trying to borrow confidence from optics. That story about your friend in the restaurant, How does she look on my arms hole, bro? That's not love, that's brand management with feelings inside. And the hilarious part, that fixation on looks predicts they'll be single longer because they're selecting for status cues. So the prescription isn't find hotter people, it's raise your internal baseline, then choose your environment. Yeah, like self-esteem lets you enter rooms without begging the room to approve of you. The Richmond, Virginia accent example, where everyone becomes mesmerized, was basically premium effect in action. Like your voice becomes scarce in that room, so suddenly you're priceless. How do you translate that into strategy without turning it into manipulation? Because if I tell someone be scarce, they might become weirdly performative. The healthier angle is, go where you're not the default, so you don't collapse into comparison anxiety. That Hertfordshire friend doing the Black Cultural Archives thing, that's exactly it. She walked out with 2 friends. No romance, but huge social capital. Premium effect for connection, too. And it's not just dating apps. IRL scarcity is real. Different clubs, different communities, different density. The dating economy is literally a geography problem disguised as a personality problem. Speaking of disguised problems, your point about the in-between generation was so real. Those 35-plus folks lost the village rituals, then the village vanished online, so they don't know the new map. But you said they sometimes do better on apps because they're authentic. No filters, imperfect profile. Which means the advantage is not their skills, it's their lack of curated weirdness. That's such a weird indictment of social media. We train people to hide, and then we reward the hidden mess anyway. Exactly. Authenticity beats the representative. The app just exposes who you are when you stop editing. And uniqueness matters because no one shares your exact experiences, so you're inherently rare. Rare in a meaningful way, or rare in a marketing way? Because people can be unique in toxic ways. Right, and that's why we need to talk about transparency, especially with attachment patterns. Like that example, I get ultra needy, jealous, easily tricked by signs of cheating. That's not a personality, that's a project with no timeline. The distinction is, are you working on it, or are you asking someone else to manage it? And therapy accessibility is a mess, so the advice has to be realistic. Self-work first. Journaling, meditation, exercise, achievable goals, small mastery. It's boring, but it works. I loved the piano example. Phase 2. Okay, I can actually do this. Instant self-esteem bump. And then you linked it to commitments, keeping promises to yourself when no one watches. The snooze button as identity code is brutal because it's true. Because when you repeatedly break small commitments, you write, I'm that person. But if you keep tiny commitments, you rebuild the I can muscle. Then dating stops being desperate. Yes, skills, active listening, metacognition, just noticing your reactive impulse. The make sure she feels hurt? No, make sure she feels heard switch. So simple it's almost unfair. And that loop changes everything. Stress down, happiness up, longer life, more money, boring but consistent. Okay, but let's ground it. Where does sex ratio and matchmaking environment fit into this? Big picture, sex ratio shifts negotiation power, partner behavior, and the kinds of relationships that form. Like your China farmland example, more men than women negotiate more. It's plausible, but it's also sensitive. Exactly, it's not a moral judgment, it's an incentive structure observation. And it explains why campuses with more women can look chaotic. Small pool of men, big competition signals. People act worse when they're scarce, and everyone knows it. That gets controversial when people suggest job choices to leverage gender balance. Because it can sound like engineering someone else's future, not your own dating life. But the underlying idea is okay. Increase your exposure to the kind of environment where you're more likely to match well. And bringing it back to what matters, relationships show up at the deathbed, not degrees. That hit me too. Regrets are about love and connection, not career achievements. So mate value isn't just a dating metric, it's a lens for building a life that supports intimacy. Which means the real value is whether you can show up stable and kind, not just photogenic. Okay, but where does the whole 70-30 body shape talk land in that? That's next episode territory, whether it's real science, marketing, or a convenient excuse for shallow dating. Welcome back. This episode is basically mate value, premium effects, and self-esteem running the whole dating show. We unpack long-term versus short-term dating filters, why context changes perceived value, and why therapy isn't the only lever. Also, we talk sex ratios, hypergamy, and why authenticity beats the perfectly filtered rep. Okay, let's land back on mate value because it sounds scientific, but it gets messy fast. Like people hear mate value and immediately imagine a spreadsheet scoring humans. But the way he frames it, it's more like ingredients: looks, status, kindness, behavior, confidence. Which is still a score, but at least it's not only cheekbones. The controversial part for me is when they start mapping it to evolutionary preferences too quickly. Because people then treat it like destiny instead of like contextual psychology. And that's exactly where the premium effect comes in. Same person, different room, different reaction. Wait, so in one environment you open your mouth and suddenly everyone's captivated. Accent, vibe, whatever. And the claim is, it's not your whole value, it's the scarcity and desirability layered on top. So it's like economic scarcity but applied to social attention. You're rare here. That actually connects to something I've seen. People date better when they're not forcing sameness. Like when someone says, I just started going to this one club, and suddenly their whole world changes. But I want to push. Is it genuine connection or just boosted options from being outnumbered? That's the tension. Premium effect can create more conversations, but it doesn't guarantee chemistry. Still, it's better than sitting in your usual pool where you're emotionally invisible. He also made a big point about context-changing mate value, like kids, which is hilarious and brutal because people pretend that's not a factor. I'm totally mature and open-minded until the kids' conversation hits. So the same trait can be viewed as downside or upside depending on what the other person is seeking. That's why I like the framing. Don't treat perceived value as an identity, treat it as a matching variable. But the danger is people weaponize it. You have low mate value, good luck. That's where the discourse gets toxic, turning a probabilistic idea into a personal verdict. And then someone goes, I'm just not selected, like selection is cosmic math. Let's talk about the dating app part. There was that experiment with black women on different platforms. The claim was fewer matches and swipes on mainstream apps because of ethnicity filtering and smaller available pools. And then when they went to a niche community app, response rate went up massively. That is premium effect in action, scarce commodity in that specific social marketplace. I'll say it though, niche success can also attract fetishization and weirdness. He even acknowledged the crude responders and the fetishization responders before getting to the genuine curiosity. So the real takeaway is not move platforms, it's move contexts where your traits are readable and valued. And that translates IRL, go places where you're not the default so you get noticed as a person. I love the Hertfordshire example. White woman in South London at the Black Cultural Archives, and suddenly she meets real humans. Not romance, but friends and connections, so the ecosystem gets better first. Which brings us to self-esteem, because premium effect isn't just scarcity, it's how you carry yourself in that room. He basically said high self-esteem reduces the need for external validation, so you don't perform attractiveness as much. Low self-esteem looks for a partner as a receipt. See, society agrees I'm worthy. That line hit, because I know people who judge how someone looks on their arm like it's a status report. Like, bro, if you're that worried about appearances, you're outsourcing your stability to a stranger. And the scary part is that can trap you. If you keep seeking validation, you stay vulnerable to rejection cycles. So what do you do practically if you're low self-esteem? He said coaching first, then self-compassion, journaling, meditation, exercise. Fine. But the sharper point to me was mastery of something small during lockdown, like piano steps that rebuild confidence. That's annoyingly effective, because competence is self-esteem you can verify. And then you added that idea of tiny commitments to yourself. The snooze button becomes identity fuel. Wait, the snooze is not trivial. It writes an instruction into who you believe you are. I frequently aren't able to do what I want. Yeah, that's basically an internal curse. Start keeping small promises, build consistency, and suddenly the bigger goals feel doable. That also connects to dating because consistency and self-regard show up in how you behave, not only what you post. I'm still thinking about the authentic profile claim, like unfiltered photos and imperfect bio actually doing better. Because the filtered representative is common, and common is forgettable. When you lean into quirks and transparency, you signal match quality, not just attractiveness. But where do you draw the line with transparency, like toxic traits you want to work on later? Exactly. Like anxious jealousy. If you don't do anything, that's not a trait. That's a warning label. He argued therapy can help, but most people need to do a lot of self-work too. Books, awareness, habits. And active listening, metacognition, responding instead of reacting, those are relationship ROI skills. It's like upgrade paths in real life. Learn the small skill, then your disagreements stop detonating. Then he pivoted to sex ratio, how environments and gender balance affect bargaining power and behavior. That China farmland example with one-child policy, more men than women, women get more negotiation power. And university campuses where women outnumber men, suddenly men have leverage, scarcity, and chaos changes direction. I'm careful with applying macro stuff directly to individuals, but it explains why dating advice fails across contexts. And it sets up hypergamy too. Women selecting equal or higher resources, not as opportunism but as historical strategy. People call it opportunism, but he calls it pattern consistency with changing modern constraints. The controversial part is when it becomes moralized, like, this makes people bad. It doesn't automatically. He also claimed Gen Z might have stronger marriages, because fewer people might commit, but those who do are more intentional. Fewer marriages, stronger marriages, that's a very post-filter era take. I'm also thinking about the decline in kids and how replacement rates and politics collide. Underpopulation affects taxes and care systems, so it's not just vibes, it's infrastructure. But natalism by ethnicity gets dangerous fast, because it turns reproduction into identity conflict. And he mentioned predictions like the UK becoming majority black or brown in the mid-century. People react with fear or excitement. That's the part where data meets emotion, and emotion starts writing policy. Anyway, zooming back to the episode's heart, mate value isn't a fixed number, it's context plus self-esteem plus environment. And self-esteem is the remote control. Premium effects only work if you can actually receive attention. Which is why I'm dying to talk about the 70-30 body shape thing, because that's where people start ranking people again. Next episode, we'll dissect whether that science is real, marketing, or just a shallow excuse with a statistic costume. All right, that's it from us. Go be scarce in the right places and keep promises to yourself like it matters. We'll see you next time. Episode 3 is where the body shape claims get put under the microscope. Welcome back. Last time we got into relationships like a playground with rules. Today we're breaking down mate value, premium effects, and why self-esteem drives the whole dating game. Okay, mate value, evolutionary psychology term, but it sounds like worth with extra steps. Not just looks, it's status, behavior, kindness, confidence, like a full stack score. And everyone pretends they're only judging vibes, but secretly it's still scoring. What I like is the context part. Mate value changes depending on the room. Like that Richmond example, same person. Suddenly everyone's captivated by the accent. Hi, your personality didn't change, your environment did. So this premium effect is basically, be scarce in a desirable setting. But isn't that just luck disguised as strategy? It's strategy, but not control. Scarcity boosts perceived value. The podcast guy said when they put black women on certain apps, match rates changed. And the internet instantly took more matches as everyone suddenly thinks they're hotter. No, it's matching dynamics, ethnicity filters, pool size, and the selection pressure. So we're not arguing whether someone is desirable, we're arguing who gets to see whom. Dating apps are basically constraint solvers with feelings attached. And when you're a rare asset in a niche, you get attention you might not get elsewhere. But does that attention translate into real love or just novelty? Novelty fades, but the pipeline matters. Getting into the right conversations first is huge. I love that IRL experiment too. White woman in South London, Black Cultural Archive. She walked out with friends, not necessarily romance. Still a win. That part's underrated. Premium effect can be social proof, not just sex appeal. And then self-esteem enters like the boss fight. Self-esteem is the remote control. Premium effects only work if you can actually receive attention. Wait, how do you receive attention? Like you block it subconsciously? Yeah, low self-esteem people treat compliments like evidence they're being judged. They start monitoring whether their partner looks right on their arm like it's a trophy camera. I know that dude, always calculating the restaurant vibe score. The point isn't that appearances don't matter. It's that fixation means insecurities running the engine. So high self-esteem doesn't make looks irrelevant. It makes looks non-controlling. Exactly. People stop asking, do I look lucky? And start asking, do I feel understood? But is self-esteem causal or just correlated with better partners? Causality's messy, but behavior changes fast when self-esteem improves. The podcast mentions studies. Higher self-esteem means less need for others' approval. And that matches real life. When you're confident, you don't perform as much. Performance is exhausting. Authentic energy gets easier when you stop begging for validation. Also on dating apps, some imperfect profiles do weirdly well. Because people without heavy filter habits just show up as them. The data says authenticity wins. Quirks become packaging, not liabilities. Unless the quirk is actually a red flag. True, which is why transparency matters, especially about your work-in-progress traits. Like attachment anxiety, needing reassurance, jealousy, scanning for cheating signals. The difference is saying this is me versus saying this is me and I'm actively improving. I'm jealous is not a personality, it's an untreated system. And the best time to work is before the relationship, not during the bomb countdown. But the guy also said therapy outcomes are often low. Access is hard. Yeah, people can't always get top-tier help, so they self-educate and self-practice. Podcasts, books, journaling, meditation, basically building your emotional muscle. But no one wants the boring parts. Journaling, meditation, consistent practice. Everyone wants instant transformation like it's a software update. Which is why the commitment to yourself idea is so clean. The snooze button example, small betrayal, then it becomes self-image code. I'm the type of person who can't do what I want, like a cursed line of script. Fix it by keeping small promises so self-esteem stops being imaginary. Self-esteem isn't just thinking good thoughts, it's doing reps and building habits. That's why mastery helps. Learning piano during lockdown gave real confidence. You weren't asking the world for validation, you were measuring progress. So for someone dating badly because they're insecure, your prescription is practice reliability? Pretty much, reliability to yourself, plus surrounding yourself with high self-esteem people. And then there's the gen gap. IRL dating died, online dating got shoved at everyone. That trapped-in-between generation narrative, people 35-ish still figuring out apps. They lost the old village matchmaking and don't know the new UI matchmaking. Meanwhile, Gen Z is inter-everything, more open to inter-ethnic dating, inter-religious dating, which implies the dating market is changing, pool preferences shifting. But then people talk hypergamy and it gets messy fast. Hypergamy here is simply seeking equal or higher resources, usually in straight dating data. And the pushback is always opportunists, like history ends in 1960. The argument is patriarchy never really got destroyed, it just got rebranded as modern choice. The spicy claim was, Gen Z will have stronger marriages, fewer marriages, but higher quality selection. But fewer marriages also means fewer families. Kids' decline is real. Replacement rate stuff matters. If couples average below 2.1 kids, you get aging stress. And the natalism angle can get political and even dangerous when tied to ethnicity. Yeah, neonatalism fears can fuel extreme policy, like turning reproduction into demographic warfare. But ignoring underpopulation is also irresponsible. Societies need enough young people. So basically, you can't solve math with vibes and you can't solve politics with panic. Welcome to Dating and Demographics, where everything is connected and everyone's mad. Anyway, before we dive into 70-30 next time, I want one takeaway. Self-esteem is operational, not poetic. Go be scarce in the right spaces, but also become the person who can believe your own worth. That's it from us. Catch episode 3, and yes, we're interrogating the body shape claim. Episode 3 is where the science gets stress tested and we see what's marketing. Welcome back. Last time we tangled attachment styles and dating instincts. This episode is mate value, the premium effect, and why self-esteem secretly runs the whole game. Okay, but mate value sounds like this evolutionary thing people quote, then fight about online. It's basically, what do you bring to the mating marketplace, right? And everyone hears marketplace and immediately thinks you're commoditizing humans. But if you remove the vocabulary, it's just attraction plus signaling plus behavior. Short-term mating is like, where's the spark tonight? Long-term is, who's my partner? And in long-term, you're allegedly weighing more than looks, status, kindness, confidence. Status isn't even just job title, it's how safe you make the future feel. Also, how loud your confidence is when you enter a room. Wait, the book talked about this premium effect stacked on top of mate value. Yeah, like when your partner walks into a place where they're scarce or unusually desirable. Scarce commodity is such a brutal phrase, though, but I get the mechanics. The example was like, go to someone's home turf and suddenly people are hypnotized. It's not that the person changed, it's that the context changes how the same traits land. Context is basically the invisible referee of dating. But how do we use this without turning into a weird manipulation tutorial? You're not manipulating, you're just picking rooms where you're not invisible. Like matchmaking theory, but real life. Go where the supply-demand curve favors you. That's exactly what the discussion did. Dating apps versus niche pools versus real-life spaces. The point wasn't your value is fake, it was your visibility is environment-dependent. And it gets political fast because environment includes bias. Like the claim was black women getting fewer matches on general apps compared to more niche communities. And then switching them to J-Date if they weren't Jewish but still got results, so the context flipped. That's the premium effect. You become the scarce, intriguing option in that room. Suddenly, you're not the wrong category, you're the interesting, rare category. This also explains IRL stories where people meet at niche events and suddenly the vibe is different. One example was a white woman going to a Black Cultural Archives event and leaving with new friends. Romantic? Maybe not, but the social capital landed because she was the scarce novelty. So the practical advice is, choose environments where your traits actually stand out. But you also need to show up like a person, not a brand trying to gamify reactions. And that's where self-esteem enters like, oh, the lever wasn't just the room. Higher self-esteem means you need less validation to feel secure in your choices. Low self-esteem people don't just care, they catastrophize every microsign from the crowd. There was that gym friend story, like he couldn't trust the relationship because he was worried how it looked. Translation, he was auditioning his partner like a fashion accessory. And then surprise, the correlation is they're often single longer, because they're evaluating the wrong signal. It's like, if you're searching for validation, you're never going to feel validated. Self-esteem isn't vanity, it's the ability to believe in your worth without constant applause. The advice sounded like therapy if you can, but also self-compassion, journaling, meditation, exercise. And then mastery. Pick something small, learn it, build evidence you can grow. The piano example was perfect. Phase 1 gives confidence, Phase 2 gives proof. I liked the commitment angle too. Keep commitments to yourself when nobody watches. Because snoozing your alarm is tiny, but it writes a line into your identity. Like you quietly tell yourself, I'm the type of person who doesn't do what I want. That's self-esteem encoded as a habit loop, not a motivational poster. Baby steps sounds cliché until it becomes the only way your nervous system trusts you. Okay, but I want to push back. Isn't there a danger of blaming individuals for dating outcomes? The conversation did acknowledge bias, so it's not purely personal responsibility. It's more like, even if bias exists, self-esteem changes how you navigate it. Exactly. When you trust yourself, you can pick better rooms and tolerate less ego pain. Also, the authenticity point was strong. On dating apps, the unfiltered profile sometimes wins. Like people who don't know filters post imperfect photos and unexpectedly do well. The algorithm thinks authenticity is a feature, apparently. Social media is mostly representatives, but dating apps reveal the real behavior underneath. And then we hit attachment and working on your traits before blaming a partner. The example was anxious jealousy, like admitting it but also doing the work. If you say, "This is me," and do nothing, you're shopping for a teammate, not a partner. Best time to do relationship work is before the relationship. Chef's kiss of advice. Then came the therapy angle. Low satisfaction rates, hard access, so do some work yourself. But also use content, podcasts, books as awareness scaffolding before you dive deeper. I love the metacognition tangent, watching yourself argue instead of just reacting. That active listening shift changes conflict from war to repair. It's basically ROI for your relationship. Pay now, get infinitely more later. And then we ended up at sex ratios and where are the men dynamics. That's a weirdly powerful lever because if supply changes, behavior changes. Negotiation power goes up when your options go up or down. The China one-child policy farmland example was heavy, like women had more say in partner choice. And university campuses with more women changing the dating dynamics, men have to compete differently. That part is controversial, though. Job choice for leverage feels ethically slippery. Still, the underlying point is practical. Pick environments that increase your odds. And tie it back. Self-esteem decides whether you can actually use those odds confidently. Mate value changes with context. Premium effects come from scarcity, but self-esteem decides how you cash in. That's why self-esteem runs dating. It sets your stance, not just your profile. All right, we'll wrap. Go find the room where you're rare and act like you're already worthy. From What We're Cooking, Episode 3 is where we interrogate that 70-30 body shape claim and separate signal from marketing.